She made Naomi get down on her knees, not to pray, not to beg, but because Madame Kang decided that a Tuesday evening in October was the perfect time to remind everyone in that ballroom exactly who held power in the Kang estate, and who never would. Naomi's knees touched the marble floor. Her hands stayed folded in her lap. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were burning, and not one person in that room of 32 people, executives, relatives, household staff, said a single word to stop it. The silver tray appeared. The wedding ring was demanded. And the woman who had spent 3 years loving a man powerful enough to make entire cities afraid quietly began to remove the one thing she had left. If that were you, if the people who were supposed to be your family looked at you like you were nothing, what would you do? Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. Stories like this one don't come around often, and I don't want you missing what happens next. Drop a comment below and tell me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. And if it hits you somewhere deep, tap that like button. It means more than you know. Now, let's go back to where this all began. The rain had been falling over Seoul for 6 hours straight by the time the black convoy turned off the highway. 3 armored vehicles. No advance call, no text message, no warning to anyone at the estate. Jinwoo Kang sat in the back seat of the middle car with his eyes closed and his hands resting on his knees. He hadn't slept properly in 11 days. The negotiations in Vienna had gone longer than expected, bloodier in some ways than expected, and he had personally held the line on 3 different occasions when other men might have let it collapse. The deal was done now. The rival operation across Eastern Europe had been methodically dismantled piece by piece, the way Jinwoo did most things, quietly, precisely, and without announcing himself until it was already over. His security chief, a compact, watchful man named Park Tae-sung, sat across from him in the dark of the vehicle. Tae-sung had been with Jinwoo for 14 years. He knew better than to fill silence with words. The convoy moved through the estate gates without slowing. The guards recognized the vehicles. No one had time to call ahead. Jinwoo opened his eyes when the car stopped. He looked at the mansion through rain-blurred glass. Every light on the first floor was burning, which was unusual for this hour. He could see the silhouette of parked vehicles he didn't recognize near the side entrance. Visitor vehicles. Multiple. That was the first thing that felt wrong. "Who's here?" he said. Tae-sung's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. "I wasn't informed of any scheduled gathering, sir." Jinwoo noticed the pause before informed. He noticed it the way he noticed everything. Without reacting, without naming it. He simply filed it away. He stepped out of the car into the rain. A young staff member sprinted out with an umbrella, nearly slipping on the wet stone steps. The boy was 17, maybe 18, one of the newer household staff. He held the umbrella over Jinwoo with both hands and kept his eyes pinned to the ground. Jinwoo looked at him. He'd seen this posture before, not deference, not respect. This was something closer to fear, but not fear of him. Jinwoo knew what fear of him looked like. This was a different kind, contained, practiced, the kind you develop when you've been living inside it for a while. "How long have you worked here?" Jinwoo asked. The boy blinked. 6 weeks, sir." "Do you like it here?" The boy's lips parted. No words came out immediately. That hesitation, that small, honest hesitation, told Jinwoo more than any answer would have. "It's a good position," the boy said finally. Jinwoo nodded slowly. He took the umbrella from the boy's hands, closed it, and handed it back. He walked inside without it, already wet. The entry hall was too quiet. The regular staff who would normally appear at his arrival, to take his coat, to offer tea, to simply acknowledge the master of the house had returned, were absent. He could hear footsteps somewhere deeper in the building. Voices, muffled, the distant clink of glassware, a gathering of some kind. He shrugged off his coat himself, folded it over the back of a chair. Tae-sung appeared at his shoulder. "Tell me," Jinwoo said. Just those 2 words. Tae-sung was quiet for 4 full seconds. That was unusual. Tae-sung was not a man who needed time to organize his thoughts. There have been changes, Taesung said. Since your departure, Madame Kang began issuing household directives approximately 2 weeks after you left. The staff were told that decisions about the estate would come from her office, not from... He stopped. Not from Naomi. Yes, sir. Jinwoo turned and looked at him directly. Taesung met his gaze and held it. What kind of directives? The kitchen staff were told not to prepare Mrs. Kang's preferred meals without direct approval. Her personal driver was reassigned. Her standing at family dinners was restructured. Servants were discouraged from addressing her as Lady Kang. Every sentence landed quietly. None of them were shouted. That was somehow worse. And no one contacted me. There were instructions, Taesung said carefully, that matters of household management were not to burden you during the negotiations. Jinwoo understood immediately who had issued those instructions. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move quickly. He simply turned toward the sound of the voices deeper in the house and began walking. He didn't announce himself. This was not unusual for Jinwoo. He had spent the majority of his adult life understanding that the truest information came from rooms that didn't know he was listening. You learned more in 60 seconds of honest observation than in an hour of curated presentation. It was a lesson his father had tried to teach him and failed. Jinwoo had learned it instead from watching what happened when his father left rooms. The ballroom was at the far end of the east wing. The doors were tall, carved, old dark wood. He could hear the voices clearly now. His mother's, clipped and commanding. His sister Seo-yeon's, sharper, cutting with that particular edge she had developed in her 20s and never lost. And beneath those, a quieter sound that he identified before he could see its source. A silence that was trying very hard not to become something louder. He positioned himself to the left of the doors where a narrow gap in the frame allowed him to see inside without being seen. He had used this exact spot as a child, watching his father's business dinners from the shadows. The room held perhaps 30 people. Business associates he recognized, distant relatives, senior household staff. They were arranged in the loose, uncomfortable way of people who had been gathered to witness something rather than to participate in it. His mother stood at the center, and there was Naomi. She was standing, barely. Her posture was perfect, because it was always perfect, because she had learned as a child in Baltimore that how you held your body in front of people who wanted to see you break was its own form of resistance. But her eyes. Jinwoo had spent 3 years learning her eyes. They were doing the thing they did when she was absorbing pain she had decided she didn't have the right to express. His mother was speaking. He tuned into the words mid-sentence. Brought nothing to this family but disruption and foreign influence. The Kang name has existed for 4 generations. It has not been to accommodate someone who came here with a suitcase and a medical degree and decided that was sufficient. Light, appreciative laughter from 2 or 3 people near the back. Everyone else held very still. Naomi said nothing. You were never going to be one of us, his mother continued. I want you to understand that clearly, not because of any failing on your part, but because certain things are simply not possible. You cannot change what blood is. Jinwoo watched his wife's face. She blinked once, slowly. Her chin didn't move. Then Seo-yeon stepped forward, and this was the thing about his sister. She always knew exactly when to escalate. I've heard her speaking to the Medical Foundation coordinators, Seo-yeon said, her voice bright and conversational, as though she were sharing amusing gossip. They call her Dr. Brooks in those meetings. Did you know that? Not Lady Kang, Dr. Brooks. Because even they understand that the Kang title was never really hers. She tilted her head. How does it feel, Naomi? To know that even the people who work for you don't actually see you as family? The room absorbed this. Naomi turned her head slowly and looked at Seo-yeon. Not with hatred, not with the hot, wet fury that the moment deserved, with something that Jinwoo recognized as immeasurably more dignified and infinitely more painful to witness. Pure, clear-eyed exhaustion. Seo-yeon, Naomi said. Her voice was even. You're not saying anything I haven't already heard. That was all she said. It should have ended something. It should have punctured the room's performance. But Seo-yeon smiled. the specific smile she used when she was about to do the thing she had actually come there to do, and turned to gesture at someone near the side table. A staff member stepped forward, holding a silver tray. "The ring," Madame Kang said. Jinwoo felt the thing happen inside him that happened very rarely. His hands were completely still at his sides. His breathing didn't change, but somewhere behind his sternum, something old and carefully controlled shifted its position, and he knew from long experience that when that happened, the next few minutes would determine the shape of many things that came after. He watched Naomi look at the tray. He watched her look at his mother. He watched the room watch her. He understood what his mother had constructed here with absolute precision. This wasn't just humiliation. It was a test with no passing grade. Refuse the request and demonstrate defiance that could be used against her. Comply and demonstrate submission that could also be used against her. The architecture of the trap was elegant and completely vicious, and it had been planned. Naomi raised her left hand. Her fingers touched the ring. Jinwoo could see from even this distance that her hand was not entirely steady. She was 37 years old. She had worked in conflict zones, South Sudan, northern Yemen, the DRC, and had held dying people's hands and made decisions under circumstances that would have dismantled most people entirely. And in this ballroom, in this house that was supposed to be her home, her hand was trembling over a piece of gold. She began to remove it, and then she stopped. She lowered her hand. She looked at his mother and the room and all the carefully arranged witnesses, and she said, in a voice so quiet Jinwoo had to read her lips for part of it, "If this is what his family needs to feel respected, I'll leave before he returns." The words were not dramatic. They were not delivered for effect. They were stated the way a person states a decision they made alone, in a room, after a very long time of thinking about it. That was what made them unbearable. Jinwoo was already moving before the sentence finished. He didn't knock. He didn't call out. He pushed the ballroom doors open the way his father had pushed doors open, without violence, but with the absolute physical certainty of a man who has never once had to wonder whether the room would make space for him. The sound didn't stop all at once. It stopped in sections, the way a fire goes out when you cut off the air. He was soaked from the rain. His hair was pressed flat against his forehead. His coat was back in the entry hall. He stood there in a dark shirt and looked at his own ballroom with an expression that 32 people would spend the rest of the month failing to accurately describe to anyone who asked. He walked across the room, not toward his mother, not toward Seo Yan, not toward the assembled relatives or the executives who had kept their silence while his wife stood in front of a silver tray. He walked to the tray. He picked up Naomi's wedding ring. He turned to face her. And then Jinwoo Kong, a man who had not knelt in front of another person since his father's funeral at the age of 23, a man whose subordinates had described him as the most controlled human being they had ever encountered, went down on one knee on the marble floor of his own ballroom in front of every person his family had assembled to watch his wife be destroyed, and slid the ring back onto her finger. He held her hand for a moment after. He looked up at her face. Naomi was looking down at him, and her composure, that extraordinary, infuriating, magnificent composure she had held all night, finally, quietly, cracked. Not into tears, into something that was harder to look at than tears. Recognition. Relief so old and tired it barely knew what to do with itself. Jinwoo stood. He turned to face the room. The silence was absolute. Even the rain against the windows seemed to have paused. When he spoke, his voice was low. No performance in it. No theater, just the specific weight of a man saying something he has already finished deciding. "The only disgrace I see," he said, "is my own family." His mother's face went very still. His sister took one involuntary step backward. The business associates near the back began studying the floor with great concentration, and Jinwoo, without raising his voice by a single increment, turned to the young security officer standing near the door and said 2 words. "Show them." The ballroom's presentation screens, installed for corporate events, used most recently for a shareholder dinner 6 months ago, flickered to life. The footage was not dramatic. It was not edited for effect. It was simply weeks of security recording from hallways and sitting rooms and the kitchen and the private garden playing at regular speed, with the ambient sound of a house going about its daily business while, embedded within that ordinary sound, The systematic and patient and methodical dismantling of one person's life inside it unfolded in real time for everyone in the room to see. There was no narration needed. Everyone watched. Jinwoo stood with his hands behind his back and watched his mother's face as she watched it. He watched Seo-yeon's expression move through several stages of calculation before arriving somewhere that looked almost like the beginning of understanding what she had actually done. He watched the executives watch the footage of themselves, seated at dinner tables, while Naomi's food order was quietly redirected and nobody said a word. He watched the moment, 12 days ago, he would later determine, when a household staff member, a woman who had been with the estate for 9 years, quietly handed Naomi a cup of tea she hadn't asked for, in the small sitting room, after a particularly long afternoon, and Naomi had looked up at her and said, "Thank you, Mrs. O. You didn't have to." And Mrs. O had looked at the door and then looked at Naomi and said, "Someone should?" The room was very quiet for a very long time. Madame Kang stood at the center of it with her hands folded and the camera on her face, and she looked, for perhaps the first time in Jinwoo's memory, like a woman who understood that the room had changed around her and that she had not been the one to change it. Jinwoo turned to Taesung, who was standing at the edge of the room with the particular stillness of a man who has been waiting patiently for this exact moment. "Get me the contracts," Jinwoo said. And that was where the real work began. The contracts arrived in a black leather folio that Taesung carried across the ballroom floor with the practiced neutrality of a man delivering paperwork rather than the instrument of someone's complete destruction. Jinwoo didn't open it immediately. He set it on the edge of the long presentation table and looked at the room, not scanning it the way a person looks at a crowd, looking at it the way a man looks at a problem he's been solving in his head for the last 20 minutes of a car ride, now finally seeing it in 3 dimensions. 31 people who had been in this room when he walked in were still here. 1. A junior associate from the Busan office, a young man with unfortunate timing and excellent survival instincts, had quietly excused himself to use the restroom approximately 40 seconds after the screens came on and had not returned. Jinwoo had noted this without looking directly at him. He would deal with that later. Or he wouldn't. The man was not the point. His mother had not moved from the center of the room. This was, Jinwoo understood, a deliberate choice on her part. Madame Kang had been the wife of a powerful man and then the mother of a more powerful one, and she had spent 61 years understanding that the person who moves first in a silence concedes something. So she stood where she was, with her hands folded at her waist and her chin at its habitual slight elevation, and she watched her son with the expression of a woman who had not yet finished calculating. Seo-yeon had moved. She was standing now near the far end of the room, closer to the secondary exit, and if she was aware that this looked like exactly what it was, she gave no sign of it. Jinwoo opened the folio. "Seo-yeon," he said without looking up. "Come here." A beat. 3 seconds. 4. She crossed the room. Her heels were loud on the marble, and she made no attempt to soften them, which meant she was still deciding whether to perform confidence or whether confidence was genuinely what she felt. By the time she reached him, Jinwoo had found the page he was looking for. He turned the folio to face her and pointed at a line. "You used the estate accounts," he said, "the household operational account, not your personal allocation, the shared account." Seo-yeon looked at the line. Something moved through her expression very quickly. Those were household expenses. "I had full authority. You redirected 43 million won over 6 weeks into a marketing consultancy registered in Jeju." He turned another page. "The consultancy was registered 8 months ago. The listed director is a woman named Cho Min-hee, who is your college roommate's younger sister." He looked at Seo-yeon. "Did I miss anything?" The room was listening. Everyone in it was listening with their whole bodies, the way people listen when they understand that what they are hearing will matter later. Seo-yeon's jaw tightened. "It was legitimate creative direction work for the—" "I don't need you to explain the cover," Jinwoo said, and the quietness of it was the thing that cut. He wasn't angry in any way she could push back against. He was just accurate. "I need you to understand that I've read it." She stared at him. He held her gaze for exactly as long as it took to make the point, then looked back down at the folio. "Your directorship of the Kang Consolidated Media Division is terminated, effective tonight." He turned another page. Your co-signature authority on the Foundation's development accounts is removed. Your office in the Gangnam building will be vacated by the end of business Friday. Taesung will coordinate the transition. Seo-yeon didn't speak for a moment. When she did, her voice had dropped to something lower and more dangerous than her usual register. You're doing this because of her, she said. I'm doing this because of the footage on those screens and the financial records in this folio and 6 weeks of documented decisions that I'm going to spend the next month unwinding. He still didn't raise his voice. The fact that those decisions were designed to make Naomi's life inside this house into something she needed to survive rather than live in is the reason I'm doing it tonight instead of at a scheduled meeting on Monday. She is not one of us. Seo-yeon. His voice didn't go hard. It just stopped carrying any flexibility at all. If you say that again in this house, I will not speak to you for a year. Do you believe me? She believed him. He could see it. And under the belief, under the calculation and the defiance and the practiced performance of a woman who had been navigating a powerful family her whole life, he could see something that he might have called grief if he were being generous, and resentment if he were being honest, and probably some compound of both that didn't have a clean name. She looked at Naomi. Naomi was standing to Jinwoo's left, slightly back, the way she stood when she was choosing to remove herself from the center of something. She was watching Seo-yeon with an expression that was not triumphant. It was not warm, either. It was the face of a woman who had decided some time ago that she was not going to perform any emotion that she hadn't actually earned the right to feel. Seo-yeon looked at her for a long time, long enough that several people in the room shifted their weight. Then Seo-yeon turned and walked to a chair along the side wall and sat down, very precisely, and did not speak again for a long while. It was not surrender exactly. It was a temporary cessation. Jinwoo knew the difference. He turned to the room. The executives who are present, he said, will each receive a communication from my office by 9 tomorrow morning. I'd encourage you to read it carefully before deciding how to respond. 3 men near the back exchanged a single glance. One of them, Park Hyung-jun, a man who had been a Kong business partner for 11 years and who had been standing 15 feet from Naomi during the entirety of what the screens had just shown, straightened his jacket lapel with one hand in the smallest, most automatic gesture of self-composure. Jinwoo looked at him. Park looked back. A man who had survived a long career in proximity to power had a particular face for moments like this. Composed, alert, waiting to understand which way the ground was moving before he shifted his footing. You were in this room, Jinwoo said, 3 weeks ago. The staff were told to address her as Miss Brooks at the dinner table. You heard it. You said nothing. Park opened his mouth. I'm not asking for a reason, Jinwoo said. I know the reason. I'm stating a fact so that you understand what I know. He looked at the 2 men beside Park, both of whom were suddenly studying the far wall with great intensity. All 3 of you know the reason. You were calculating. That's what you do. You look at where the power is and you arrange yourselves accordingly. He closed the folio. The calculation has changed. None of them spoke. My office. Tomorrow morning. He turned away from them, which was its own form of dismissal. He turned to Naomi. She was looking at him. Really looking, the way she rarely let herself do in front of other people, as though she had forgotten for a moment where they were. Are you all right? He said. Just that. Nothing elaborate. She nodded once, then quieter. You're soaking wet. Something about the mundaneness of it. In the middle of all of this, in this room full of ruined alliances and frozen expressions and a silver tray that was still sitting on the side table where someone had left it, made him almost smile. Almost. I'll dry, he said. She made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. It was something more tired and more real than a laugh. Then his mother spoke. Jinwoo. The room contracted around the sound of it. Madame Kang had not moved. She had been standing in the same position for the last 18 minutes, watching her son systematically dismantle the structure she had spent 6 weeks constructing, and she had not made a sound, which meant she had been preparing. Jinwoo turned to face her. She looked, for the first time, like she might be working harder than usual to look like she wasn't working at all. There was a tightness around her eyes that had not been there when he walked in, but her voice, when it came, was even. "You will regret this," she said. Not a threat, a statement of conviction. "Tell me why," Jinwoo said. "Because you are making a decision based on sentiment in front of an audience that is going to spend the rest of the year evaluating your judgment. Because you are protecting one woman at the cost of the family's internal coherence. Because—" She paused, and he saw her choose the next words with the kind of deliberate care that meant she had been holding them ready. "Because your father would have understood that personal feelings and family governance cannot occupy the same room." The silence after this lasted 4 seconds. "My father," Jinwoo said, "governed this family through fear. He held it together by making sure everyone inside it was more afraid of him than they were of anything outside it." He looked at his mother. "Including you, including me." He paused. "Is that the model you're recommending?" Madame Kang's expression shifted, just slightly, in a way that meant she hadn't expected him to say that out loud, here in this room. "That's not what I—" "He hit you twice that I witnessed," Jinwoo said. "Once when I was 9 and once when I was 14. There were other times I didn't witness." "I know there were other times." He said this without cruelty, which was somehow the most devastating way to say it. "I have spent 20 years building something that didn't require that. I will not have someone I love survive inside it the way you survived inside his version of it." The room was not breathing. Madame Kang stood absolutely still. Then something crossed her face, something unexpected, something that moved through her features like weather and was gone almost immediately, but not quite quickly enough. Jinwoo saw it. He didn't name it, but he saw it. "You don't know what I survived," she said. "No," he agreed. "I don't. Fully." He held her gaze. "But I know what it looked like from the outside." She turned away. Just slightly. A quarter turn. It was the most significant movement she'd made in the last 20 minutes, and everyone in the room registered it. Naomi registered it differently than anyone else. Jinwoo watched her watching his mother, and what he saw in Naomi's expression was something complicated. Not satisfaction, not vindication, not the hot release that this moment might have justified. It was something closer to sorrow. Genuine sorrow, the kind that doesn't perform itself. That was the thing about Naomi that he had not fully understood when he married her and had spent 3 years learning. She didn't actually want anyone destroyed. It wasn't a philosophical position. It wasn't strategy. It was just how she was made. She had worked in places where destruction was the ambient condition, where violence was the water everyone swam in, and something in that experience had done the opposite of what it might have done to another person. She hadn't come out of it harder. She had come out of it with a very precise and unromantic understanding of what it cost. What it always cost. Everyone. He would think about that look on her face for a long time afterward. The guests began to leave. Not all at once. In the way people leave rooms where something significant has happened. In small clusters, with the careful body language of people who are in the middle of revising what they thought they knew. Brief words to no one in particular. Coats retrieved, cars called. Park Hyung-joon paused near the door and turned back, and for a moment Jinwoo thought he was going to say something that resembled an apology. Instead, Park said, "I'll have my office send the Q4 projections by Friday," in the tone of a man confirming a business arrangement, and then he left. The door closed behind him. The room emptied to its bones. Jinwoo, Naomi, Taesung near the wall, 2 security staff at the doors, Madame Kang still at the center, and Seo-yeon still in her chair against the side wall. The silver tray on the side table. Jinwoo walked to the side table and picked up the tray and held it out to a staff member, a woman in her 40s who had been standing near the kitchen entry the entire time with the particular stillness of someone who has learned that stillness is the safest position. "Throw this away," he said. The woman, Mrs. Oh, he realized, the same Mrs. O from the footage, the one who had brought Naomi tea, took the tray with both hands and nodded, and the look she gave him was so briefly, intensely grateful that it caught him slightly off guard. Then he turned back to his mother. "You'll stay in the East guest suite tonight," he said. "We'll speak in the morning." Madame Kang looked at him. There were things moving behind her face that he could not fully read, which was unusual. He had been reading her face his entire life. "And then?" she said. "And then we'll discuss what comes next." "What comes next?" she repeated, testing the weight of it. "I'm not making every decision tonight," he said. "I'm making the ones that needed to be made tonight. The rest can wait until morning." She studied him for a long moment. Then she turned and walked toward the east corridor. Her steps were even. Her back was straight. She did not look at Seo-yeon as she passed her, which was a specific and pointed thing. Seo-yeon watched her mother leave. Then she looked at Jinwoo. "You humiliated her," she said. "She organized a public humiliation of my wife," he said. "I showed the recording of it to the people who were present for it. That's the full extent of what I did to her this evening. She's 61 years old. I know how old she is." Seo-yeon stood up from the chair. She was controlling herself very carefully, and the effort of it was visible in small ways. The line of her shoulders, the way she held her hands. "You've been gone for 3 months, Jinwoo. 3 months. Do you have any idea what it's been like here? Running the household accounts while the foundation kept redirecting resources, managing the staff turnover, dealing with the security rotation that your office changed twice without notifying anyone in the house." "Naomi managed those things," he said. "That was her role." "Naomi," she stopped, took a breath. "Naomi does not understand how this family operates." "Naomi," he said, "built the foundation's distribution framework from scratch in 14 months. She negotiated 3 hospital partnerships in countries where she had no existing contacts. She speaks 4 languages, and she ran triage in active conflict zones before she was 30. He looked at his sister. "What she doesn't understand is why the household she lives in treats her like a guest who overstayed her welcome. I'd argue that's not a failure of her understanding." Seo-yeon's chin came up. "You always do this. You make her into something she's not." "What is she then?" His voice was quiet. "Tell me. In this room, right now, with no one to perform for, what is she to you?" A long silence. "She's not one of us," Seo-yeon said, and her voice had gone rough at the edges, which meant she was finally, despite everything, feeling something real. "I'm not saying it to be cruel. I'm saying it because it's true. This family has a history, a structure, things that existed before she arrived and will exist after." She stopped, as if hearing where the sentence was going. "After she's gone," Jinwoo finished. Seo-yeon didn't answer. "You've been waiting for her to leave," he said. Not a question. "I've been waiting for you to see clearly." "I see clearly." He looked at his sister, really looked, the way he had looked at her when she was 8 and crying over something their father had said, when she was 17 and convinced the world was designed to underestimate her, when she was 26 and sharp and ambitious and completely certain she knew which direction everything should go. He had loved her in all those versions. He still loved her. That was the part that made this difficult in a way that nothing else tonight had been difficult. "I see a woman who has been in this house for 3 years and who has never been given a fair chance at being part of it. I see a family that decided what she was before she walked through the door. And I see my sister, who is brilliant and capable, and better than this, choosing to be the worst version of herself because she's afraid of something she won't name." Seo-yeon's jaw tightened. "What am I afraid of?" she said. "That she's good," he said simply. "That she's genuinely, uncomplicatedly good. And that makes something more complicated for you that you haven't worked out yet." The room held that. Seo-yeon looked at Naomi, who had not moved or spoken in several minutes. Naomi met her gaze and held it. There was nothing aggressive in Naomi's face, nothing victorious. She looked like a woman who was standing on the other side of a very long night and was not yet sure whether the night was over. Something moved through Seo-yeon's expression. It lasted less than 2 seconds. Then she picked up her bag from the floor beside the chair, settled its strap on her shoulder, and walked toward the door. At the threshold, she stopped. "The Jeju account," she said, without turning around. "The consultancy fees. I'll have my assistant send a full accounting to your office." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't close to one. But it was something. "Friday," Jinwoo said. She left. The ballroom was quiet in the way large empty rooms are quiet, with a kind of acoustic aftermath, the ghost of all the sound that had been in it. Taesung crossed the room and placed a fresh towel over Jinwoo's shoulders without being asked, the way a person performs a small service when they want to acknowledge something without naming it. Jinwoo accepted it without comment. Naomi sat down on the edge of the presentation table. Not elegantly, just sat, the way a person sits when their legs have decided they've done enough. "Mrs. O," she said, to the room in general. The staff member had reappeared near the kitchen entry. "Is there any coffee still?" "Yes, Lady Kang." The title landed quietly. Mrs. O said it the way she'd said it in the footage. Not with emphasis, not as a statement, just as the correct thing, spoken correctly. Naomi nodded. "For everyone, please, if anyone wants it." Mrs. O went to the kitchen. Two of the remaining staff exchanged a glance that was not quite a look and not quite a smile. Jinwoo sat down beside Naomi on the table edge. They were quiet for a moment. Outside, the rain had slowed to something lighter, intermittent, tapping against the tall windows without conviction. "I should have come back sooner," he said. "You didn't know." "I should have known." He was not performing guilt. He was stating a logistical failure with the same precision he applied to everything else. "I set up the monitoring system the night I left. I told Taesung the parameters. I should have included household management in the daily brief." "Jinwoo," she turned to look at him. "You were dismantling a criminal network across 3 countries. And you were in a war in this house." She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't want you distracted. It was my decision not to tell you." "You shouldn't have had to make that decision." "No," she said. "I shouldn't have." She looked at her left hand, at the ring. "But I did, and here we are." He looked at her hand too, at the ring on it, which was exactly where it was supposed to be, which had just spent the longest 90 seconds of his life on a silver tray. "Are you angry with me?" he said. She thought about it. He appreciated that she thought about it rather than simply answering. "Not angry," she said finally. "I'm tired, and I'm glad you're home. And I'm a little bit—" She stopped. "What?" "I'm a little bit afraid," she said, "of what this does to your relationship with your family. Because I know you, and I know you're going to spend the next 3 months wondering whether tonight was worth it. And I need you to not do that." He looked at her. "It was worth it," he said. "Okay," she said. "Then hold on to that. Because your mother is going to spend the next 6 months testing whether you believe it." He almost smiled again. More than almost this time. Mrs. O returned with coffee. They sat in the ballroom with their coffee while the rain made its quiet sound against the windows, and Taesung stood at the far end of the room in his usual watchful stillness, and the screens had gone dark, and the silver tray was gone, and the night had settled into something that felt not resolved, not healed, not even close, but honest. Just honestly, exactly what it was. Then Jinwoo's phone buzzed. He looked at it. The message was from a number he recognized as a proxy line used by his legal office for sensitive internal communications. It read 4 words. She filed it already. He looked at the message for a moment. Then he looked at Naomi, who was looking at her coffee cup and didn't see his face change. He typed back, "Filed what specifically?" The response took 11 seconds. "Petition for emergency proxy authority over Kang Syndicate operational decisions. Filed 2 hours ago. Before you arrived. Your mother, Jinwoo. She knew you were coming." He set the phone face down on the table. The coffee was still warm in his hand. Outside, the rain stopped completely, all at once, the way it sometimes does. Not tapering off, but simply ending, leaving a silence so total it seemed to have weight. Madame Kang had known he was coming home. She had staged this entire evening anyway, which meant the humiliation of Naomi was not an act of unchecked maternal authority or family politics spiraling past its own logic. It was a calculated opening move, designed to be witnessed, designed to provoke exactly the response it had provoked, designed to place Jinwoo on record as choosing his wife over his family's stability in front of business partners and legal witnesses. And the petition, filed 2 hours ago, before he set foot in the door, that was the follow-through. She wasn't losing tonight. She had used tonight. He sat with that understanding for exactly as long as it took the coffee to cool slightly in his hand, and then he put the cup down and picked up his phone and said, "Taesung." Taesung was beside him in 4 steps. Get me Kim Sung-ho, Jinwoo said. Tonight. Taesung looked at the phone in Jinwoo's hand. He was smart enough not to ask why. It's past midnight. I know what time it is. Taesung nodded and stepped away, already dialing. Naomi looked up. She had heard the shift in his voice. The small, specific shift. The one that had nothing to do with emotion and everything to do with him moving from one mode of operation into another. She had heard it before, in the early years of their marriage, when business required it, and she had learned to recognize it without asking immediately what it meant. She looked at him and waited. He turned to face her, and there was something in his expression that was different from anything she'd seen on him tonight. Not anger, not grief, not the cold authority he'd carried into this room 2 hours ago. Something quieter and more dangerous than any of those things. Your mother-in-law, he said, filed a legal petition to remove my operational authority over the syndicate 2 hours before I walked through that door. Naomi set her coffee cup down. She planned this, Naomi said. Not a question, not even surprise exactly. Just a woman recognizing with a particular and exhausted clarity that the thing she had suspected for weeks and could not prove and had chosen not to say was exactly what it had been all along. She planned it, he confirmed. Naomi looked at the dark ballroom around them, at the empty chairs, the quiet screens, the space where 32 people had stood an hour ago, watching her remove her wedding ring. Then tonight wasn't the end of it, she said. No, Jinwoo said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at him directly, and he could see her working through something. Not fear, he noted, not panic. Something more deliberate and more tired and ultimately more resolute than either of those. What do you need from me? She said. He looked at her, at this woman who had spent 6 weeks inside a house that treated her like a problem to be managed, who had stood in this ballroom and quietly begun to remove her wedding ring rather than cause him difficulty on the other side of the world, who was now sitting on the edge of a table in an empty room at midnight, asking him what he needed. I need you to trust me, he said, for what comes next. The phone in Taesung's hand connected. Jinwoo could hear Kim Sung-ho's voice, rough with sleep, saying his name. Jinwoo stood, and somewhere in the east wing of the house, behind a closed door, Madame Kang sat at a writing desk with the lamp burning and waited to see whether her son had finally made the mistake she had spent 3 years preparing for. Kim Sung-ho arrived at the estate at 12 minutes past 1 in the morning. He was 63 years old, had been practicing corporate and criminal law in Seoul for 38 of those years, and he was the only attorney Jinwoo trusted with anything that actually mattered. He drove himself, no driver, no assistant, in a gray sedan that was unremarkable in every way that was intentional. He carried a leather briefcase that was older than most of Jinwoo's security staff. He came in through the side entrance without being told to, because he had been coming to this estate for 11 years, and he understood instinctively which doors were appropriate for which kinds of visits. This was a side entrance kind of visit. Taesung led him to the study on the second floor. Jinwoo was already there, standing at the window with his back to the room. He had changed out of the rain-soaked shirt into something dry, which was the only concession to the hour he had made. The desk was covered in printed documents. Taesung had been busy in the 40 minutes between the phone call and the attorney's arrival. Kim Sung-ho set his briefcase on the chair by the door, looked at the documents on the desk, and said, "She used the family trust filing code." Jinwoo turned from the window. "Explain that," he said. "The emergency proxy petition." Sung-ho moved to the desk and picked up the top document. He was wearing reading glasses that he produced from his shirt pocket with the automatic motion of a man who had long since stopped being self-conscious about needing them. It was filed under the Family Trust Governance Clause, Article 9, Subsection 4. Your grandfather wrote it into the original trust structure in 1987. It allows any primary blood trustee to petition for operational proxy if they can demonstrate, quote, material risk to syndicate stability due to the incapacity or absence of the designated authority. He looked at Jinwoo over the glasses. She's arguing your 3-month absence constitutes a destabilizing gap in leadership. I was conducting business on behalf of the syndicate. She'll argue the European operation was unauthorized expansion outside your designated operational scope. He set the document down. It's weak, but it's not nothing. The clause has never been tested in court because no one has ever had reason to invoke it. That means there's no precedent blocking it. Jinwoo crossed to the desk. He looked at the document without picking it up. She filed this 2 hours before I walked in the door. She knew I was coming back tonight. Yes. How? Sung-ho took his glasses off and held them in one hand. This was, Jinwoo had learned over years, the gesture he made when he was about to say something he would prefer not to say. Your flight manifest, Sung-ho said. The private terminal at Gimpo. Someone in the operations office accessed the arrival schedule at 4:17 this afternoon. Jinwoo was quiet for 3 seconds. Who has access to that system? Authorized syndicate personnel, senior household management, and Sung-ho paused, and anyone operating under a senior household management credential. She doesn't have that credential. No, Sung-ho said. But someone who does have it made a query at 4:17. He picked up a second document from the desk. Taesung had printed it, a system access log, the kind that required his particular clearance level to pull. The credential belongs to the household operations manager, a man named Choi Byum-sik, who has worked for the estate for 7 years. Jinwoo looked at the log. The timestamp was exact. The credential was exact. The query, a single search for inbound private flight arrivals under the Kang corporate account, was precise and brief, the kind of search made by someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. Where is Choi Byum-sik now? Jinwoo said. His quarters, Taesung said from the doorway. He's been in the estate all evening. He was present in the ballroom earlier. He manages the event setup. Jinwoo looked at Taesung. Bring him here. Taesung left. Sung-ho lowered himself into the chair behind the desk. Not Jinwoo's chair, the secondary chair, the one for visitors, and opened his briefcase and began moving through its contents with the systematic efficiency of a man who had prepared several contingencies on the drive over. The petition has a 48-hour response window, he said. You need to file a counterclaim before it goes to the trust arbitration panel. If it reaches the panel without a counter, they're obligated to hear it on its merits, and even a weak argument gets a full hearing. He produced a folder. I've drafted the preliminary response. You'll need to sign tonight. What's our position? Your position is that you were present, active, and conducting authorized syndicate business throughout the 3-month period, which is provable through communications logs, the European operations documented outcomes, and the signed dissolution agreements from the Vienna meetings. He placed the folder on the desk. The stronger argument, the one that shuts the petition down cleanly, is demonstrating that Madame Kang's own actions during your absence constituted a breach of her trustee obligations. The household conduct. The financial conduct, Sung-ho said. The household matters are damaging to her reputation, but they're not legally actionable under the trust framework. The Jeju consultancy payments, however, redirecting trust-adjacent household funds into a privately controlled account while the designated authority was absent. That's a fiduciary argument. He looked at Jinwoo. It's also the argument that gets ugly, publicly. How ugly? It names Seo-yeon, specifically and formally. Jinwoo stood with that for a moment. Not long, but a moment. Draft it, he said. Choi Byum-sik was 44 years old, average height, with the particular physical quality of a man who had spent 2 decades ensuring he was unobtrusive enough to remain invisible in rooms that didn't want to notice him. He had managed the Kang estate's household operations since Jinwoo took over the property, and in 7 years Jinwoo had spoken directly to him perhaps 12 times. He came into the study with Taesung behind him and stopped inside the door. He looked at Jinwoo, then at Sung-ho, then at the documents on the desk. His face did the thing that faces do when the body understands a situation before the mind has finished constructing a response to it. The blood moving. The particular stillness of someone who has just identified that the room they walked into is different from the room they were told they were walking into. Jinwoo didn't invite him to sit. You accessed the flight arrival system at 4:17 this afternoon, Jinwoo said. Choi didn't answer immediately. This was, in itself, an answer. Mr. Choi, Sung-ho said from the chair in his even attorney's voice. The access log is date-stamped and credential-specific. We're not asking whether the access occurred. We're asking who instructed you to make the inquiry. Choi's jaw moved slightly.
I was checking. Who instructed you? Jinwoo said. The silence lasted 6 seconds. Jinwoo counted them. Then Choi said, Madam Kang asked me to monitor the corporate flight schedule. She said she wanted to know when you'd be returning so she could prepare the household. When did she give you that instruction? 3 weeks ago. Specifically. Choi exhaled through his nose. The day after the dinner, where he stopped, reorganized. 3 weeks and 2 days ago.
3 weeks and 2 days ago. Which meant the day after the first formally staged humiliation of Naomi that appeared in the security footage. The day after Madam Kang had tested what she could do and found no resistance. She had immediately moved to ensure she'd have advance warning of the one event that would end her operation. Did she tell you why she needed the information? She said she wanted to prepare a welcome home. Jinwoo looked at him. Choi met his gaze for approximately 2 seconds and then found something on the floor to be interested in. Mr. Choi, Sung-ho said, are you aware that using an authorized estate credential to conduct surveillance on family member movements without the primary authority's knowledge is a violation of the estate employment agreement you signed 7 years ago? Choi's shoulders moved, barely. I was following a household superior's instruction. Madam Kang is not your superior in the estate hierarchy, Sung-ho said. Your employment agreement designates the primary resident authority, who, in the estate's current structure, is Lady Kang. The specific words, Lady Kang, seemed to hit Choi differently than Choi had expected them to. His face moved again. Jinwoo had seen this before, in different rooms, with different people. The moment when a person who has been operating under one set of assumptions is shown, precisely and without drama, that the assumptions were wrong. It was not a comfortable thing to watch. It was also not something he had time to manage carefully tonight. You'll provide a written account of every instruction Madam Kang gave you over the past 3 months, Jinwoo said. Every communication, every request. Taesung will sit with you tonight. Choi looked up sharply. Tonight, Jinwoo said. You can do it here, or you can do it after we've contacted the labor board regarding the credential violation. Your choice, and I need it in the next 10 seconds. Choi chose quickly. Sung-ho left at 2:40 in the morning with Jinwoo's signature on the counter petition and a list of 3 additional filings he would action from his office before the arbitration window opened at 9. Taesung was in the east sitting room with Choi Byung-sik and a recorder. The house was quiet. Jinwoo stood in the upstairs hallway outside the study and let the quiet sit on him for a moment. His body was informing him, with increasing specificity, that he had been awake for approximately 26 hours and had spent the last 4 of them in the middle of a situation that had required a level of sustained precision he normally reserved for operations that had weeks of preparation behind them. Tonight had had none. Tonight had been improvised on a foundation of 11 years of knowing how Sung-ho thought, 14 years of knowing how Taesung moved, and a lifetime of knowing how his mother operated. He walked to the end of the hall. The door to the master suite was closed. He knocked twice, quietly, the specific knock Naomi had asked for years ago, when he'd startled her awake one too many times coming in from late meetings. Come in, she said. She was sitting up in bed with a lamp on and a medical journal open in her lap, which he recognized as her version of what he did when he couldn't sleep. She didn't pace, she read. Or she tried to read. The journal was open to the same page it had been on the last 3 times he'd walked in on her doing this in moments of stress, which meant she wasn't actually reading it. She looked at him, at his face. How bad, she said. He sat on the edge of the bed and told her. All of it. The petition, the trust clause, the flight manifest access, Choi Byung-sik, the 48-hour counter window. He told her in the same way he told her most things, which was directly and without managing the parts he thought might upset her, because she had told him early in their marriage that being managed was the thing she found hardest to forgive. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she closed the journal. She knew you were coming, Naomi said. Yes. And she did it anyway. Yes. Naomi looked at the middle distance. He watched her processing it the way she processed difficult information. Not immediately, not with the first instinctive emotional response, but with the particular systematic patience she'd developed in field medicine, when the wrong diagnosis made under pressure cost more than a delayed correct one. She wanted you to walk in, Naomi said slowly. She wanted you to react. She needed you on record, in front of witnesses, choosing me over the family structure. To substantiate the petition. To substantiate the petition. Naomi was quiet. The whole night. The ring. The people she invited. The business partners specifically. They're potential witnesses to my emotional state, Jinwoo said. If the arbitration panel questions whether my judgment has been compromised by personal investment. Naomi looked at him. Has it been? He held her gaze. I knelt in front of 30 people to put your ring back on your finger. That's not an answer. My judgment is intact, he said. What I did tonight was not a compromise of my judgment. It was my judgment. She studied him for a moment. Then she nodded once, the way she nodded when she decided to accept something as true and move forward from it. Then tomorrow is going to be very bad, she said. Probably. What do you need me to do? He looked at her. He had asked himself this question about her in various forms many times over 3 years. What did Naomi need? What did Naomi want? How do you love someone who is competent enough to need very little and stubborn enough to ask for even less than that? He had gotten better at it. He was still not good at it. Nothing tonight, he said. Tomorrow I may need you to speak to the Foundation's legal contacts. If this goes past the 48-hour window, we'll need independent verification of the Foundation structure as separate from the syndicate trust, and you're the named director. She nodded. He lay down beside her without changing. She turned off the lamp. In the dark, after a moment, she said, She looked at me tonight, after you dismissed everyone, right before she walked out. My mother? Yes. A pause. She didn't look angry. She looked... Naomi searched for the word. She looked like she'd already moved on to the next thing. Jinwoo stared at the ceiling. She had, he said. He woke at 5:40 to a call from Sungho. He was in the hallway before the second ring, phone to his ear, already walking. Tell me, he said. The arbitration panel has been convened, Sungho said. His voice had the particular flatness of a man who had not slept, and who was not bothering to manage his own exhaustion. Not in 48 hours, this morning, 9 o'clock. Jinwoo stopped walking. That's not the standard window. No. Someone petitioned for expedited hearing on grounds of urgent operational risk. The petition was supported by 2 panel members who I am just now learning had pre-hearing communication with your mother's filing attorney last week. The hallway was gray with early light through the window at the far end. Jinwoo looked at it. She has people on the panel. She has relationships with people on the panel. Whether those relationships constitute procedural misconduct is an argument I can make, but not before 9 this morning. How long have those relationships existed? A short pause. The 2 panel members in question were appointed to the trust arbitration structure in 2019. Your father was still alive. Jinwoo understood. His father had built things the way he built everything, with redundancies, with leverage, with the deeply pragmatic understanding that every structure needed mechanisms the people inside it didn't all know about. He had never shared those mechanisms with Jinwoo because sharing them would have diminished their value as leverage over Jinwoo specifically. His mother had known. His mother had always known. She had lived beside that man for 38 years and had learned every brick of what he built, and she had been waiting. Jinwoo could see this now with a clarity that was almost physical in its sharpness. She had been waiting not since his marriage to Naomi, not since his father's death, but possibly since Jinwoo himself had started becoming something she didn't fully control. Since he was 19 or 20 and had started making decisions that contradicted her preferences and discovered, to her visible surprise, that he was capable of holding his position against her. She had been building a contingency for 30 years. I'll be at your office at 7, Jinwoo said. There's something else, Sungho said. The petition was co-signed. By whom? Another pause. Longer. Seo Yeon, Sungho said. Jinwoo leaned against the hallway wall and looked at the floor. She co-signed it before the ballroom, he said. Not a question. Filed simultaneously with your mother's petition, same timestamp. He thought about Seo-yeon sitting in that chair in the ballroom, watching the screens, watching her brother dismantle the operation she'd participated in. He thought about her saying the Jeju accounts, "I'll have my assistant send a full accounting by Friday," and how it had sounded not quite like remorse, but like something adjacent to it, something that might have grown into something eventually. She had filed the petition hours before that conversation. She had walked into that ballroom already having moved her piece. Everything she'd said to him tonight, the argument about the household, the accusation that he was choosing sentiment over structure, even the moment that had seemed like the beginning of something honest, all of it had been built on a foundation she'd already poured before he came home. He stayed in the hallway for a moment, just breathing, letting the shape of it settle into its actual dimensions. Then he went back to the bedroom and turned the lamp on. Naomi was awake. She had been lying in the dark listening to one side of a conversation that had told her enough. He sat on the edge of the bed. Seo-yeon co-signed the petition, he said. Before tonight. Before the ballroom. Before any of it. Naomi sat up. She looked at him, and for the first time since he'd arrived home, he saw something move through her face that was not composure, not the held qualities she'd maintained through the ballroom, through the late-night contracts, through the revelation about his mother's planning. This was something more naked, not for herself, but for him, for what she could see this information was doing to him. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Don't. I'm not apologizing for her. I'm sorry that you—" She stopped, tried again. "She's your sister." He looked at his hands. "I know what she is," he said. "You loved her." "I still love her." He said it without sentimentality, the way he said most true things. That's what makes it precise, as a feeling. There's nothing blurry about it. Naomi reached out and put her hand over his. He turned his hand over and held hers. Outside, the city was beginning to make its earliest sounds. Somewhere below, the kitchen staff was starting their morning prep. "She was my sister for 30 years, he said. Before you, before the syndicate, before any of this. She used to follow me around when she was 4 years old because she was afraid of the dark in the east hallway, and I was the only one who would walk with her without making her feel small for being afraid." He looked at the wall. "I don't know how to hold both of those things." Naomi didn't tell him that it would be all right. She didn't offer anything softening or general. She held his hand and let the silence be what it was. This was what she had learned about grief, the real grief, the kind that didn't have a clean cause or a resolution you could organize, was that it didn't want to be fixed. It wanted to be witnessed. She had learned this in clinics and places where people lost things so large and so multiple that no vocabulary quite covered it, and the only honest thing to offer was to stay in the room, so she stayed. After a while, he said, "The hearing is at 9. "I know." "I need to be at Sung-ho's office at 7. "I know." He looked at her. "What will you do today?" She thought about it. "I'm going to call the foundation's legal office when they open. I'm going to get the director documentation to Sung-ho by 8, and then," she paused, "I think I'm going to ask to speak to your mother." He looked at her. "Alone," she added. "Naomi. Not to negotiate, not to confront her." She met his gaze steadily. "I want her to tell me herself, what she actually wants, not through attorneys and arbitration panels and silver trays. I want to sit in a room with her and I want her to look at me and tell me what she actually wants from this. She won't give you a straight answer. Maybe not." Naomi was quiet for a moment. "But I'll know more from watching her not answer than from everything else combined." He looked at her for a long time. "You're not going to stop," he said. "Stop what?" "Trying to find the human version of her." She looked at him with something that was almost, not quite, a sad smile. "She's somebody's mother, Jinwoo. She's your mother. I have to try." He wanted to tell her that some people didn't have a human version worth finding, that some people had built their human version into a weapon so long ago that the original material was no longer accessible, that mercy extended in that direction was not mercy, but exposure.
He wanted to tell her that her willingness to try was the most beautiful and most dangerous thing about her. He said none of it. He looked at the time. 5:52. He stood, still holding her hand for one moment before releasing it. "I'll be back before noon," he said. "I'll be here." He was almost to the door when his phone buzzed again. He looked at it. Not Sung-ho this time. The number belonged to a senior operations manager in the syndicate's Incheon Logistics division. A man named Woo. A man who had no reason to contact Jinwoo at 5:52 in the morning under any circumstances Jinwoo could construct that were not serious. He answered. "Director Kang." Woo's voice was tight. Controlled tightness, the kind produced by someone managing their own alarm with professional effort. "I apologize for the hour. We have a situation at the port facility." "What kind of situation?" "The warehouse documentation from the past 6 weeks has been audited, from outside. We received notification 40 minutes ago from a regulatory office contact. Someone requested a formal inspection of the facility's import records going back 90 days. Jinwoo's hand tightened slightly on the phone. "Who requested the inspection?"
Wu was quiet for 2 seconds. "The request came through a legal proxy filing," he said. "The attorney of record on the filing is a firm we don't have on our contact list, but the proxy authority they're operating under." He stopped. Then, "It's registered to a Kang Family Trust subaccount director, the same trust account used for the arbitration petition filed last night." Jinwoo looked at the hallway wall, the port facility, the import records from the past 90 days, the period that covered the transition of 3 major operational accounts that had been quietly restructured in preparation for the European negotiations. The period that, if examined by a regulatory authority working from the right angle with the right questions, would surface documentation gaps that Jinwoo's legal team had been planning to address in an organized, scheduled, careful process over the next 4 months. His mother had not filed 1 move last night. She had filed 3. The ballroom was the distraction. The arbitration petition was the legal mechanism. And the port facility inspection, triggered simultaneously, timed to land while he was still awake at midnight dealing with the first 2, was the weapon that made the other 2 matter. Because if the regulatory inspection found what it was looking for, the arbitration panel's question wouldn't be whether Madam Kang had the right to petition for proxy authority. It would be whether Jinwoo Kang was fit to hold authority at all. He lowered the phone. Behind him, Naomi had gone very still. He turned around and looked at her, and she could see it on his face. Not panic, because he did not panic, but the specific expression of a man who has just understood, with complete and terrible clarity, that he has been several moves behind in a game he didn't know he was playing, and that the gap between where he is and where he needs to be is wider than anything he has faced in a very long time. "She didn't want the house," he said. Naomi looked at him. "She never wanted the house," he said. "She wants the syndicate." The words sat in the early morning quiet of the hallway like something physical. "And she's built a legal structure, a regulatory trigger, and a witnessed record of my emotional instability," he continued, "in a single night." Naomi stood up from the bed. "Then we have until 9 o'clock, she said. He looked at her. "Call Sung-ho back," she said. "Right now. Tell him about the port. And then tell me exactly what documents you need from the Foundation's records, because I am going to pull every single one of them before 7, and you are not walking into that hearing without everything." Her voice was not raised. It was not performing strength. It was the voice of someone who had made a decision in the last 15 seconds about exactly what kind of morning this was going to be, and had already started moving toward it. He looked at his wife, this woman who had stood in a ballroom and quietly begun to remove her wedding ring rather than cause him trouble, who had asked him what he needed at midnight in an empty room, who had just spent the worst evening of her 3 years in this house, who was now standing barefoot in the early dark telling him to call his lawyer and hand her a list of documents because they had 3 hours and she intended to use all of them. He dialed Sung-ho, and somewhere in the east wing, behind a closed door, with a lamp still burning at 6 in the morning, Madam Kang heard the sound of her son's footsteps moving with purpose through the upper hallway, and she set down her tea, and for the first time since the convoy had pulled through the estate gates the night before, something that was almost satisfaction crossed her face. She had made him move fast. Fast was how you made mistakes, and she had been waiting for his first real mistake for a very long time. Sungho's office was on the 14th floor of a building in Seocho that had no signage on the exterior and a lobby that looked like a mid-tier accounting firm. This was intentional. The men who came here did not want to be seen coming here, and Sungho had built his entire practice on the understanding that discretion was not a service. It was the product. Jinwoo arrived at 6:53. Naomi had been awake since 5:45, pulling documentation from the Foundation's digital archive on her laptop at the kitchen table, wearing the same clothes she'd had on the night before. Her hair pulled back with the kind of functional efficiency that had nothing to do with appearance and everything to do with getting the work done. By 6:30, she had forwarded 11 files to Sungho's secure email and was on the phone with the Foundation's deputy legal director, a woman in Singapore whose time zone made her the most accessible option at that hour, and who, to her credit, asked exactly 2 clarifying questions before saying she'd have a notarized corporate structure summary sent within 40 minutes. Jinwoo had watched Naomi work for 10 minutes before he left. He'd stood in the kitchen doorway and watched her move through documents with the same precise, unhurried speed she brought to everything that mattered to her, and he had felt something that was not easy to name. Gratitude was part of it, and something older and less comfortable than gratitude, something closer to the recognition that he had not, in 3 years of marriage, fully understood what he had. He had left without saying this. He would find a way to say it later. Or he would fail to find the words and show it through actions instead, which was how he had handled most things that mattered in his life, and which Naomi had once told him, with affectionate precision, was both his greatest strength and his most consistent limitation as a husband. Sungho met him at the elevator. The attorney looked like a man who had aged 4 years and 4 hours. His jacket was on, but barely, and the reading glasses were already in his hand at 6:53 in the morning, which meant he hadn't stopped reading since they'd spoken at 5:40. "The panel composition," Jinwoo said, before Sungho could speak. "Tell me the full roster." 5 members. Sungho turned and led him down the hallway toward the conference room, speaking without slowing. "Chairman is Lee Dong-soo, 68, appointed to the panel in 2015. He's clean. No prior contact with your mother's side that I can establish. The 2 compromise members are Hwang Jung-sik and Baek Soon-ja. The other 2 are Park Chan-woo and Oh Mi-seon, both appointed in the last 3 years, both without prior Kong family contact. Which way do Park and Oh lean? Park is procedurally rigid. He'll follow the framework of the clause regardless of relationship. Oh Mi-seon is newer, and I don't have a read on her yet." Sungho pushed open the conference room door. But the arithmetic isn't the primary problem. The conference room table was covered in documents. 2 junior associates Jinwoo didn't recognize were seated at the far end with laptops open. A third person was standing near the window, a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and the posture of someone who operated in institutional environments, who turned when Jinwoo came in. "This is Han Yeon-soo," Sungho said, "former senior counsel to the Financial Supervisory Service. She's consulting on the port inspection angle." Han Yeon-soo gave Jinwoo a single direct nod. No performance in it. "Mr. Kang, the inspection request carries a provisional regulatory flag. That means the FSS is aware of it. They haven't acted on it yet, but awareness means it's logged. If the arbitration panel's decision this morning goes against you, and the provisional flag is still active when that happens, the FSS is obligated to formally open an inquiry." She said this the way doctors deliver diagnoses, clearly without cushioning, because cushioning wasted time. An open FSS inquiry would effectively freeze certain operational accounts while under review. Your mother's proxy petition, if granted, would then apply to an operation in which the primary authority holder is under regulatory investigation. She'd have legitimate grounds to maintain the proxy until the inquiry resolved, Jinwoo said. "Potentially years, Sungho said. Jinwoo stood at the head of the table and looked at the documents spread across it. He was not sleeping deprived in any way that showed externally, which was something he had trained into himself over 2 decades of operations that didn't care what time zone he was in or how many hours it had been. Internally, there was a low-grade pressure behind his eyes and a specific tightness across his shoulders that told him his body was keeping score even when he wasn't. "She'd have the syndicate," he said, "while you fight a regulatory flag that she triggered," Han Yeon-soo said. "Yes." "What kills the inspection request?" proving the original filing was made in bad faith, that it was submitted not to protect the public interest, but to achieve a private legal objective. Han Yeon-soo moved to the table and placed one hand on a document. The problem is that proving bad faith requires demonstrating coordination between the inspection request, the arbitration petition, and the proxy filing. 3 separate legal instruments filed through 3 separate mechanisms. Connecting them is possible, but not in... She looked at the clock on the wall. 2 hours and 4 minutes. Jinwoo looked at the clock. Then he looked at Sung-ho. What can we do in 2 hours and 4 minutes? What they could do, it turned out, was less than Jinwoo wanted and more than Madame Kang had likely planned for. Han Yeon-soo identified a procedural flaw in the arbitration panel's convening. The 48-hour standard window had been bypassed using an urgency clause that required sign-off from 3 panel members, and only 2 had signed. The third signature on the expediting order belonged to Lee Dong-soo, the chairman, who had technically signed in his administrative capacity rather than his judicial one, which was a distinction that existed in the panel's foundational charter and which Sung-ho argued, with the particular controlled passion of a man who had been reading trust documentation for the last 3 hours, constituted a procedural defect sufficient to challenge the expedited timeline. It would not stop the hearing, but it gave them standing to demand a 30-minute delay while the procedural challenge was entered into the record. 30 minutes in which Sung-ho could request that the panel acknowledge and formally log the coordination argument before the substance of the petition was heard. 30 minutes was not a solution. It was a crack in a wall. Jinwoo looked at the crack. "Use it," he said. At 8:17, his phone buzzed. He looked at it under the table. "Naomi." A text, not a call. "Your mother agreed to meet, 9:30, the estate. She set the time." He stared at the message. 9:30 was 30 minutes after the hearing began. His mother had set a meeting with Naomi for a time when she expected Jinwoo to be fully occupied at the arbitration. Whatever the meeting was, she had designed it to happen without him. He typed back, "Don't go without Taesung in the building. 3 seconds." "I know," she replied. "I'm not reckless. I'm strategic." He looked at the message for a moment. Then he almost smiled, which was not appropriate given what was happening, and put the phone back in his pocket. The arbitration panel convened in a meeting room on the 7th floor of a legal services building in Junggu that smelled like recycled air and carpet that had been cleaned too many times. The room had a long central table, a panel of 5 seats along one side, and 2 opposing tables for petitioner and respondent. It was not impressive. It was not designed to be. The architecture of these rooms was built for function: a table, some chairs, and no windows, so that everyone inside focused entirely on each other. Jinwoo sat at the respondent table with Sung-ho to his left and Han Yeon-soo to his right. Across the room, at the petitioner table, sat a man he didn't recognize, his mother's attorney, a man in his late 50s named Jang, who had a reputation for meticulous preparation and a face that communicated nothing at rest. Beside Jang sat a junior counsel and a woman who appeared to be there specifically to manage documents, which meant Jang had anticipated needing to move paper quickly. His mother was not present. Under the trust framework, the petitioner was not required to appear in person. Seo Yan was not present either. The panel filed in. 5 people in business formal who arranged themselves behind their nameplate cards with the slightly over-organized precision of people who were in these rooms regularly enough that the routine had calcified into ritual. Chairman Lee Dong-soo was the last to sit. He was a small, tidy man with white hair and the careful movements of someone who understood that how a room perceived his authority mattered as much as the authority itself. He looked at both tables. Then he opened the proceedings. Sung-ho filed the procedural challenge in the first 3 minutes. Jang objected in less than 30 seconds. His objection was well prepared, of course it was. He had known the challenge was coming, or had prepared for the possibility, which amounted to the same thing. Chairman Lee listened to both arguments with the expression of a man doing arithmetic. Then he conferred briefly with the panel member on his immediate left, Hwang Jung-sik, one of the 2 compromised members, who leaned in and said something Jinwoo could not hear. Lee nodded twice, very slightly. The procedural challenge is noted and entered into the record, Lee said. The panel finds that the convening timeline, while expedited, falls within the administrative authority of the chairman's office. The challenge does not constitute grounds to delay the hearing. We will proceed. Sung-ho didn't react visibly. Neither did Jinwoo. 23 minutes had passed. The crack in the wall had held for 23 minutes, which was not nothing. Now they were in the hearing itself. Jang's opening was exactly as meticulous as his reputation suggested. He walked through Article 9, subsection 4 with the patient clarity of a man who had spent a week preparing to explain it to people who might not know it. He presented the 3-month absence. He presented documentation of operational decisions made during that period, some of which, he argued, fell outside Jinwoo's designated scope and indicated a pattern of authority overreach rather than authorized international business development. This was the European operation framed as recklessness. Jinwoo listened to it and kept his face still and his hands flat on the table. Then Jang presented the port facility. He did not have the inspection results. The inspection hadn't happened yet, but he had the inspection request, and he framed it not as a weapon he had deployed, but as evidence that regulatory concerns about the facility existed independently and had been brought to light by concerned parties acting in good faith. He used the phrase good faith 4 times in 6 minutes. Jinwoo counted. Sung-ho's response began with the foundation. This was the strategic choice they had made in the car on the way here. Don't fight the absence argument directly, Tamas. The absence was a fact, and arguing about its meaning on Jang's terms put them on Jang's ground. Instead, establish what had been built during the absence. The foundation's documented outcomes. The European operations results, the signed dissolution agreements, the measurable reduction in cross-border operational risk, the 3 separate preliminary accords that protected syndicate interests in markets Jinwoo's father had never accessed. Not recklessness. Construction. Then Sung-ho placed Naomi's foundation documentation on the table. The notarized corporate structure summary from Singapore had arrived at 7-Eleven. It established, with the specific legal clarity of a document prepared by someone who dealt in international foundation law, that the Kang Global Foundation operated as a structurally independent entity from the Kang Family Trust, separate governance, separate accounts, separate legal identity. What Madam Kang's petition implied, Sung-ho argued, was that the foundation's existence and Naomi's leadership of it represented an unauthorized diversion of family resources. The documentation showed the opposite. Jang raised his pen slightly. The foundation's establishment was funded through a designated charitable allocation provided for in the trust's philanthropic provisions, Sung-ho said. Section 17, subsection 2, which I have here. He produced it. He placed it beside the foundation documents. He did this without haste, which was more effective than speed would have been. Panel member Oh Miseon, the newest member, the one Sung-ho had no read on, leaned forward slightly and looked at the document. This was a small movement, and Jinwoo almost missed it, but he didn't. He watched her read the section heading and then look at the Singapore summary and then make a very brief note on the pad in front of her. Panel member Park Chan-woo, the procedurally rigid one, had been writing steadily since the hearing began. His expression was the expression of a man who was genuinely paying attention to the documents rather than to the performances around them, which was either very good for Jinwoo or very bad, depending on where the documents led him. The 2 compromised panel members had the quality of people waiting for a specific moment. They weren't unengaged. They were conserving engagement for something specific. Jinwoo watched all 5 of them and kept his face neutral and his breathing even and let Sung-ho do what Sung-ho was paid to do. At 9:26, Chairman Lee called a brief recess. In the hallway, Sung-ho poured himself water from a service table and drank half of it before speaking. Oh Miseon is reading the documents, he said quietly. I saw. Park hasn't looked up from his notes in 40 minutes. That means he's building something. Building for us or against us? I don't know yet. Sung-ho finished the water. Huang and Beck haven't asked a single question. In 23 years of arbitration hearings, I have never seen a panel member go 90 minutes without asking a question. They're waiting to vote, Jinwoo said. They already know how they're voting. Yes. So it comes down to Lee, Park, and Oh.
Yes. And Jiang hasn't played the port yet, not fully. He established the flag. He hasn't shown what's in the inspection. He doesn't have the inspection results either, but he doesn't need them. He needs the flag on the record, and he needs the panel to understand that the flag exists. That's enough to plant the question about your fitness. Sung-ho looked at him. He's going to call a witness. Jin-woo looked at him. In the recess notification, Sung-ho said, there was a procedural ad filed by Jang's office, a witness statement, filed under the emergency evidence provision. I just received it. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a single folded page. Jin-woo took it and opened it. The witness was Choi Beom-sik. His written statement, prepared, the document indicated, at 11:45 the previous evening, which was approximately 50 minutes after Tae-sung had sat down with him in the East sitting room to take his account, gave a carefully constructed description of Jin-woo's behavior on his return to the estate. The confrontation with Madam Kang, the financial actions taken against Seo-yeon, the summary removal of executives' contracts. It described these events in language that was technically accurate and contextually inverted. The actions of a man acting deliberately and with full information, presented as the actions of a man who had returned home enraged and made sweeping decisions in an emotional state without deliberation. Choi Beom-sik had given his account to Tae-sung at midnight, and then he had given a second account to Jang's office at 11:45, before Tae-sung had even finished. Jin-woo looked at the date and time stamp on the document for a moment. The coldness that moved through him was not anger. Anger was warm. This was something more structural, the recognition at a granular level of exactly how thoroughly he had been read. She had known Tae-sung would question Choi. She had prepared Choi with a parallel account to provide. Choi had not been her informant only. Choi had been her witness, held in position until the exact moment he was needed. Jin-woo folded the document. Can we discredit it? The timing discrepancy is arguable, Sung-ho said, but it requires demonstrating that Choi provided a statement to Jang's office while simultaneously under questioning by your security chief. The panel may view that as exactly the kind of aggressive pressure tactic that supports Jang's characterization of your decision-making. Jin-woo looked at the hallway wall. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. Tae-sung. Not a text. A call, which Tae-sung used for things that were not safe to put in writing. He answered and walked 6 steps away from Sung-ho. Report, he said. Tae-sung's voice was controlled in the way it got when something had happened that required control to discuss. Lady Kang arrived at the estate at 9:25 for the meeting with Madam Kang. I know, I authorized it. Yes, sir. A pause. The specific kind. The kind Tae-sung used when the next sentence was the one that mattered. Madam Kang was not in the East guest suite when Lady Kang arrived. Her belongings were there, her personal effects. But she was not. Jin-woo went still. Where is she? We don't know. Her personal vehicle is in the garage. Her driver is here. He says she dismissed him at 7:15 and told him he wasn't needed today. A beat. I have staff checking every room in the estate. She's not in the building. Who came in or out of the estate between 6 and 9? I'm pulling the gate logs now. Tae-sung's voice shifted slightly, not audibly to most people, but Jin-woo heard it. There's a gap. What kind of gap? 46 minutes, between 7:02 and 7:48. The gate camera feed shows uninterrupted operation, but the timestamp metadata on the file is inconsistent with the surrounding footage. Someone paused the recording and restored it. Someone who knew the estate's security system. Someone who had lived in that estate for decades and had watched it be built and upgraded and had, at some point in the last 3 months while Jin-woo was not there to notice, learned enough about its structure to identify the gap, or someone she had instructed. Find her, Jin-woo said, and check on Naomi. Lady Kang is in the main sitting room. I have 2 personnel with her. A pause. She knows something is wrong. She hasn't been told. Tell her, Jin-woo said. Tell her now. Don't let her be in that house without the full information. Yes, sir. He ended the call. He turned back to Sung-ho. Sung-ho read his face. What happened? My mother has left the estate. A beat. Where?
I don't know, Anne. Jinwoo moved back toward the hearing room door. She's not in the building. The gate recording has a 46-minute gap, and we have 8 minutes before the recess ends. Sung-ho stared at him. Jinwoo, if she's not at the estate and she's not here, and the hearing is about to reconvene, then she's somewhere else doing something specific, Jinwoo said, which is exactly what she wants us to be thinking about when we walk back into that room. He pushed open the hearing room door. Inside, Jang was seated at his table reviewing notes with the composure of a man who already knew what the afternoon looked like. The panel was beginning to reassemble. Jinwoo sat down. His phone buzzed again. He looked under the table. Naomi. Not a text this time. A voice memo sent because a voice memo was faster than typing in a situation that moved quickly. He put the phone to his ear. Her voice was low. Tai-sung must have just told her. I found something, she said. In the East guest suite. She left fast. Her things are there, but she didn't pack, which means she planned to come back, or she left in a hurry. I don't know which, but she left her planner on the writing desk. Open. A pause. There's an address. It's an FSS satellite office in Mapo, and there's a name written beside it. The name is Jinwoo. The name is Lee Dong-soo. Jinwoo looked at the chairman of the arbitration panel, who was settling into his seat 12 feet away and straightening the papers in front of him. Lee Dong-soo. His mother had a meeting at the FSS office in Mapo, with the name of the arbitration panel chairman written in her planner. Jinwoo thought about several things at once. The speed required, the pieces that were moving, the thing he would have to do if he was right about what this meant. He thought about his grandfather writing Article 9, subsection 4 into a trust document in 1987 for reasons that had nothing to do with Jinwoo's marriage, and everything to do with a world where information could be positioned like a weapon before the weapon was ever drawn. He thought about Naomi's voice on that audio memo, low and controlled and telling him the truth as fast as she found it. He thought about 30 years of his mother watching him and learning the precise shape of how he made decisions and building something that fit every edge of that shape like a mold. Chairman Lee Dong-soo called the hearing back to order. We'll continue with the petitioner's witness submission, he said. Jang rose to present Choi Byung-sik's statement. Jinwoo looked at Sung-ho and said, at a volume only Sung-ho could hear, Challenge Lee's standing to chair, right now, on the record. Sung-ho's head moved slightly, a fractional turn. On what grounds? Prior ex parte contact with the petitioner, documented by the petitioner's own handwriting in a physical planner that is currently in our client's possession at the estate. He held Sung-ho's gaze. It's a grenade. I know. Pull the pin. Sung-ho looked at him for exactly the length of time it took to decide. Then he stood up. Mr. Chairman, he said in the voice he used when he was about to make a room very uncomfortable. Before the petitioner proceeds, the respondent requests a formal declaration of any ex parte communications between panel members and either party to this proceeding. The room shifted. Jang's pen stopped moving. Oh. Ms. Aeon looked up from her notes. Park Chan-woo stopped writing. Lee Dong-soo's expression did not change, but something happened around his eyes, a tightening, fast and controlled and almost invisible. The micro-expression of a man whose body registered something before his face caught up. Counsel, Lee said, this is an extraordinary interruption. It's a foundational procedural requirement, Mr. Chairman. Sung-ho did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. The respondent is in possession of documentation suggesting prior contact between this proceeding's presiding officer and the petitioner occurring outside the formal hearing record. If that contact occurred, the chairman standing to preside is compromised, and the integrity of this expedited convening is in question. He paused. The respondent requests that the documentation be formally entered into the record and that the full panel vote on whether to continue under the current presiding structure. The room was not quiet. It was the kind of not quiet that happened when everyone in it was making rapid internal calculations simultaneously, and the noise of all that calculation pressed against the walls. Jang was on his feet. This is a delay tactic. The respondent has produced nothing. There is no documentation before the panel. The documentation exists and can be produced within the hour. Sung-ho's voice remained even. The respondent requests a 90-minute continuation to retrieve and authenticate the physical evidence. There is no provision for... There is a provision in Section 6 of the panel charter for the suspension of proceedings when a formal conflict of interest objection is raised, Park Chan-woo said. Everyone looked at him. Park Chan-woo had not looked up from his notes for the last 20 minutes. He looked up now, and his expression was the expression of a man who had been reading very carefully and had reached a conclusion he was prepared to state. Section 6, Clause 3, Park said, "The provision exists. The Respondents' Council is entitled to raise it." He looked at Chairman Lee. "The panel is required to vote on whether to acknowledge the conflict of interest claim before proceeding." Chairman Lee's face was very still. Hwang Jung-sik and Baek Soon-ja exchanged a single, rapid glance, the glance of two people who have just seen the floor of a plan shift beneath them. Oh Miseon was looking at Chairman Lee with an expression that was not hostile. It was something more careful than hostility. It was scrutiny, applied to someone she was seeing clearly for possibly the first time. Jin-woo sat at his table with his hands flat on the surface, and his breathing even, and his pulse doing what his pulse always did in moments that had arrived at their decisive point, running slightly fast, a low, insistent pressure against his ribs that he had learned to treat not as fear, but as information. The information it was giving him right now was, this is the moment. Not a guarantee, not a certainty, just the moment. The one where everything that had been built and planned and moved and countered and answered and struck back had converged into a single point, the way a river converges at a falls, and what happened in the next 30 seconds would determine whether the water found its way through. He looked at Chairman Lee Dong-soo, and Lee Dong-soo looked back at him. And in that look, in the 2 seconds of direct contact between them, Jin-woo understood with complete clarity that his mother had not made one mistake tonight, not one tactical error, not one gap in 60 years of careful preparation and patient accumulation, except the planner. Open on the desk, with the address and the name written in her own handwriting. He thought about that for 1 second. A woman who planned this thoroughly. A planner left open. And then something cold and entirely different moved through him. Not triumph, not relief, because he had just thought of the one explanation that made the planner make sense. She had left it for Naomi to find. She had known Naomi would go into that room. She had known Naomi would call him. She had known he would use it, here, now, in this room, exactly as he was using it. And he did not yet know what that meant. But he knew, with the specific certainty of a man who has just realized he is still in the game rather than at the end of it, that the next move was not his. "The panel will vote," Chairman Lee said, in a voice that had lost something since the start of the hearing and not yet found a way to get it back. Park Chan-woo raised his hand immediately. Oh Mi-seon raised hers 1 second later. The vote was called. And across the city, in a satellite office in Mapo, Madame Kang sat in a chair across a desk from a man whose name was in her planner. And she looked at the clock on the wall, and she waited to see whether her son was as good as she needed him to be. The vote was 3-2. Park Chan-woo and Oh Mi-seon had raised their hands. Lee Dong-soo, reading the room with the speed of a man who understood that a 3-2 vote against him was categorically different from a 2-3 vote in his favor, raised his own hand a half-second later and made it 3-2 in the recorded minutes rather than the chairman casting the deciding vote against himself. It was a small salvage. It was the only one available to him. The hearing was suspended pending conflict of interest review. Jang gathered his documents with the controlled efficiency of a man who was already recalculating. He said nothing to Jin-woo on the way out. He said nothing to Sung-ho. He walked out of the room with his junior counsel and his document manager, and the particular forward-leaning posture of someone who has not lost but who is now operating in a different version of the same fight. Hwang Jung-sik and Baek Soon-ja filed out behind the other panel members without making eye contact with anyone at the respondent table. Their silence had the quality of people who understood that the recording of this session now existed in a formal legal archive, and that every decision they made going forward would be made in the awareness of that fact. Oh Mi-seon paused at the door. She looked back at Sung-ho, not at Jin-woo. At Sung-ho, with the expression of a woman who wanted to say something and had decided the most professionally appropriate version of saying it was to simply hold the look long enough that its meaning was clear. Sung-ho nodded once. She left. In the hallway, Sungho sat down on a bench along the wall and put his reading glasses in his pocket and pressed both hands flat against his knees and breathed out through his nose for a long time. That worked, he said. He sounded slightly surprised, which for Sungho was the equivalent of another man throwing his jacket in the air. It's not over, Jinwoo said. No. Sungho looked up at him. But the expedited hearing is dead. The port inspection flag is now contextually compromised because it was filed in coordination with a proceeding that has a documented conflict of interest problem. The FSS won't formally open an inquiry while the arbitration is under review. It creates too much procedural exposure for them. He paused. We have time now. Not a lot, but time. Jinwoo was already looking at his phone. Nothing from Taesung. Nothing from Naomi since the voice memo. He called Taesung. 3 rings, 4. Taesung picked up on the 5th, which was 2 rings longer than usual. Status, Jinwoo said. Lady Kang is at the estate. She's fine. A beat. Madam Kang returned 20 minutes ago. Jinwoo stopped walking. She came back. Yes, sir. Through the main gate. Her personal vehicle, the one we thought was in the garage. It appears a secondary vehicle was used for the departure this morning. We missed it. Taesung's voice had the particular quality of a man acknowledging an operational failure without softening it. She walked in through the front door. She's in the main sitting room. Is Naomi with her? A pause. Yes. He was moving toward the elevator before Taesung finished the word. The drive back to the estate took 19 minutes. Jinwoo sat in the back of the car and looked out the window at Seoul moving past. The mid-morning traffic, the gray October sky that had cleared somewhat since last night's rain, the ordinary machinery of a city that did not know or care what had been happening in a legal building in Jeonggu for the last 3 hours. And he thought about a planner left open on a desk. He had been turning it over since the moment it occurred to him in the hearing room. The explanation that made it deliberate, that his mother had left it for Naomi to find, knowing Naomi would find it, knowing Jinwoo would use it, led to a question he could not fully answer yet. What did she gain from that? What was the move that required him to blow up the hearing from the inside rather than lose it cleanly from the outside? He thought about what Sungho had said. We have time now. Time was what the planner had bought him, and he could not work out whether that was an accident or whether it was the point. He was still thinking about it when the car turned through the estate gates. The main sitting room was off the entry hall, a long room with tall windows that faced the garden. In autumn, the garden was mostly bare. The trees had been losing leaves for 2 weeks, and the groundskeepers had been raking every morning, and through the windows now the garden had the particular stripped clarity of a space that had shed everything non-essential and was simply itself. Naomi was seated on the far sofa. Her posture was the posture she used when she was in a room that required her full attention, not tense, but present in a way that took up exactly the space she occupied and no more. Across from her, in the high-backed chair that had been his father's preferred seat in this room in which no one had sat in since his father died, was Madam Kang. She was wearing the same clothes she'd had on that morning. She looked, for the first time in Jinwoo's memory, like a woman who had been somewhere difficult and had returned without having resolved whatever she went there to do. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her posture was correct. But something around her eyes was different. A tiredness that was not the tiredness of a long night, but something older and less easily slept away. She looked at Jinwoo when he came in. He looked at her. He looked at Naomi, who met his gaze and gave him a single small nod that communicated several things at once. I'm all right. She came back on her own. I don't fully understand it yet either. Jinwoo sat down. Not across from his mother. Beside Naomi, on the same sofa, which was a positioning choice that was not accidental and which his mother registered without comment. The room was quiet for a moment. The hearing was suspended, Jinwoo said. His mother looked at him. I know. You knew before I called anyone. Zhang called me. She said it without inflection. He called me from the building, and you came back. I was already on my way back. She looked at her hands, then at him. I went to see Lee Dong-soo this morning. I know. I went to tell him to withdraw. The sentence sat in the room. Jinwoo looked at her. You went to tell your contact on the panel to withdraw, he said slowly, before the hearing began. Before it ended, she corrected. I went at 8. The hearing was already in session. She looked at the window, at the bare garden. I sat in his office for 40 minutes. He told me the hearing was proceeding as planned. He told me the expedited convening was solid, and the witness statement was solid, and that by noon I would have what I petitioned for. She paused. I told him to withdraw anyway. Jinwoo said nothing. He was waiting because there was more, and interrupting it would cost him something he needed to hear. He refused, she said. He told me the process was already in motion, and that withdrawing his participation at that stage would create more legal exposure than continuing. He told me... She stopped. Something moved through her face. He told me that I had started something I should let finish. The room was very quiet. Naomi was looking at Madame Kang with the expression she had, the one Jinwoo had tried to describe to himself before and failed. That was not sympathy and not analysis, but something that held both without collapsing into either. Why did you go to withdraw? Jinwoo said. His mother looked at him. Because of the planner, she said. He held very still. I left it open, she said. I told myself I left it by accident. I was moving quickly this morning. I was thinking about the drive. She stopped. Her jaw tightened slightly. I don't leave things by accident. I have not left things by accident in 40 years. I left it open because some part of me wanted her to find it. She looked at Naomi, directly, for the first time since Jinwoo had entered the room. I don't know what that means. I've been trying to understand it for the last 3 hours, and I don't have an answer that satisfies me. Naomi looked back at her. She didn't fill the silence. She let it be what it was. I built this, Madame Kang said. All of it. The petition, the port trigger, the panel contacts. Those relationships go back to your father's time, Jinwoo. They were built to protect this family, not to... She stopped. Started again. I watched your father run this family for 38 years. I watched what power looked like when it was held by a man who understood that everything was leverage. Everything. Every person. Every relationship. Every feeling. I watched it work. And I watched what it cost. She looked at her hands again. I learned from it. I thought I was learning the right things. Jinwoo was quiet for a moment. What did you actually want? He said. Not the petition, not the syndicate. What did you actually want from last night? She looked at him. The tiredness in her eyes was real, and he let himself see it rather than treating it as a tactic, because that was its own kind of discipline. I wanted her gone, she said. Not cruelly. She paused. I wanted you to have a wife who understood what this family is, what it costs. Who could stand in a room full of the people we deal with and not be a liability? I looked at her, and I saw someone who was going to pull you toward a version of yourself that I didn't recognize. And I was afraid of what that meant for everything I spent my life building. Jinwoo said, You were afraid she'd change me. I was afraid she already had. The sentence landed. Naomi exhaled very quietly beside him. She has changed me, Jinwoo said. He said it the way he said most important things, without drama, without hedging. She has changed me into someone who handles a legal ambush at 6 a.m. by calling his attorney instead of making phone calls that couldn't be untranscribed, into someone who built enough documented evidence over 3 years that, when last night happened, I had something to show rather than just something to say. He looked at his mother. Into someone who was in the sitting room at midnight with a warm cup of coffee and enough clarity to think through what you'd actually done, rather than reacting to what it looked like. He paused. You spent last night trying to show me she makes me weak. She spent last night proving she makes me better. Madame Kang looked at him for a long time. Then she looked at Naomi. Naomi looked back. The two women looked at each other in the way women sometimes look at each other when the men in the room have said everything that can be said from the outside of something, and what remains is the interior of it, the part that has no clean language and doesn't need one. I treated you badly, Madame Kang said. The words came out flat and without adornment,
which was the only way they could come out of a woman who did not possess a vocabulary of apology and was attempting to construct one in real time from available materials. I treated you as a problem to be managed because it was easier than treating you as a person I was afraid of. I want you to know that I understand the difference. Naomi was quiet for a moment. Do you understand, Naomi said, that what you did last night is the kind of thing that doesn't fully heal? Madame Kang held her gaze. Yes. That I can decide not to carry hatred for it and still have the memory of it and still have that matter? Yes. Then I need you to not ask me for forgiveness right now, Naomi said. Her voice was even, not cold, even in the way of someone who is being precise about something that costs them something to be precise about. Not because I won't get there, but because it's too early for it to be real, and I'd rather it be real when it comes, or not come at all, than have it be a performance that makes this room feel better for 10 minutes. Madame Kang was quiet. Then she said, That's fair. 2 words. She said them like they weighed something. Jinwoo looked at his wife. She was looking at his mother with the expression he had first noticed when she was working in the field, the one she used when she was assessing a patient who had done something that made the situation worse and was now lying in the consequence of it. Not judgmental, not warm. Clinically honest, and underneath the clinical honesty, a care that was structurally inseparable from the honesty, that was in fact the same thing expressed differently. He thought, this is who she is, this exact thing. And his mother had spent 3 years trying to make her leave. Seo Yan arrived at the estate at 11:40. She had not been summoned. She came in her own car, parked it herself rather than having the driver do it, walked in through the front door and told the staff member who greeted her that she didn't need to be shown anywhere. She knew where they'd be. She came into the sitting room and stood in the doorway. She looked at her mother in their father's chair. She looked at Jinwoo. She looked at Naomi. She had been crying, which was not something Seo-yeon did where people could see it, which meant either she hadn't been aware it was visible or she had decided at some point in the last several hours that managing visibility was not the priority. I need to say something, she said, and I need to say it now or I'll have spent 3 days organizing it into something palatable, and by then it won't be what it actually is. No one spoke. She looked at Naomi. I co-signed a legal petition to strip my brother of his authority to run his own family's business, she said. I signed it before I walked into that ballroom last night. While I was having a conversation with him about whether our family had treated you fairly, I had already signed a document that used what happened to you as evidence of his emotional instability. She stopped, breathed. There's no version of that I can make sound like it wasn't what it was. Naomi looked at her. Then don't try to make it sound like something else, Naomi said. I'm not. Seo-yeon's voice was not smooth. It had the rough quality of someone speaking from something real without having had time to process it into a presentable form. I spent 10 years watching my father run things, and then I watched my brother run things, and I was always… She stopped. Found it. I was always the one who understood the strategy, who could see 3 moves ahead, who could tell you exactly what was going to happen and why. And nobody wanted to hear it because I was the daughter, not the son. So I found other ways to be heard. She looked at Jinwoo. Last night I told you I was afraid because she was good. You were right. But the thing I was more afraid of was that she was good in a way that made what I do look like exactly what it is, which is manipulation dressed as strategy. The room held this. Jinwoo looked at his sister, at the woman who had followed him down dark hallways at 4 years old, because he was the only person who didn't make her feel small for being afraid. He looked at what 30 years and 1 terrible night had made of that. You're going to want me to forgive you, he said. I know. Not today. I know. She looked at her feet, then back up. I'm withdrawing from the petition co-signature. I've already contacted Jang's office. My name comes off the filing by end of business today. She looked at him. The Jeju accounts? The full accounting will be on your desk today. Not Friday. Today. He nodded. And… She looked at Naomi again. The specific effort this required was visible in her face. I don't know how to be in a room with you yet. I'm going to be honest about that. But I understand that the problem is mine to solve, not yours to accommodate.
Naomi looked at her for a long moment.
"That's a start," Naomi said. Careful, precise, neither warm nor cold, a beginning measured at exactly the size it actually was. Theo Yan nodded. She looked at her mother.
Something passed between them, the look of two people who had built something together that had now significantly collapsed and who were going to have to reckon with their shared responsibility for it at some point, but not right now, not in this room, not in front of these two people. She left without staying for the rest of it. The legal resolution took 11 days. The Conflict of Interest Review removed Huang Jungsik and Baek Soonja from the arbitration panel and opened a formal investigation into Lee Dong-soo's conduct, which Lee Dong-soo managed by resigning his chairmanship and cooperating with the review in a way that suggested he had consulted an attorney immediately after the hearing was suspended and received specific advice about the most survivable path forward. The proxy petition was dismissed without hearing on the 12th day. The procedural defects were sufficient on their own, without requiring the substantive argument to be made. The port facility inspection was formally withdrawn by the filing attorney, who cited a change in client instruction. No regulatory flag remained in the FSS records after the withdrawal was processed. Sung-ho told Jinwoo on the phone that afternoon, "It's done." 2 words, delivered with the same slightly surprised quality he'd had in the hallway outside the hearing room, as if he had prepared for more difficulty than had ultimately been required and was still adjusting to the gap. Jinwoo thanked him, put the phone down, sat in his study for a few minutes without doing anything specific. He was very tired. He had been very tired for 11 days and had not addressed it because there was nothing to address it with. Now there was. He sat in the quiet and let the tiredness be what it was. His mother left the estate 2 weeks after that night. Not because she was ordered to. Jinwoo had made the decision, in the days following the arbitration, to rescind the sunrise ultimatum he'd given her in the ballroom. It had been made in anger and in front of witnesses, and it was the kind of dramatic gesture that felt right at 1 in the morning and looked different in the gray light of reconsideration. He told her she could stay. He told her they would need to renegotiate the terms of her role, that her access to household management and syndicate decisions would be restructured, that certain things would be different now in ways that were not punitive but were necessary. She listened to all of this. She said she understood. Then she said she'd like to move to the Busan property. She said it the way she said most things, with her back straight and her chin at its habitual elevation and her voice even. But underneath the evenness, if you had spent your whole life learning to read her face, you could see something that was not defeat exactly, not surrender, but something like the exhaustion of a woman who had fought a very long fight and was now prepared for the first time to put it down. The morning she left, she paused in the entry hall where Naomi was overseeing the delivery of new equipment for the Foundation's first physical office space in the East Wing. Boxes of medical supplies, communications equipment, a server setup that a tech coordinator was directing with cheerful efficiency. Madame Kang looked at the boxes, at the staff moving purposefully through space that had previously been unused formal reception rooms, at the small evidence of something being built where something old had been. She said nothing for a moment. Then she said to Naomi, without looking at her, "The East Wing gets good light in the morning. The windows face southeast." Naomi looked at her. "The clinic offices I'm setting up will need good morning light," she said. A pause. "I know," Naomi said. Madame Kang nodded once. Her driver appeared at the door. She walked toward it. At the threshold, she stopped. Her back was to the room. "The Foundation name," she said. "Kang Global." A beat. "It's a good name." She walked out. Naomi stood in the entry hall and watched the door close. She stood there for a moment after it closed. One of the tech staff asked her a question about the server placement, and she turned back to it and answered. And the morning continued around her with its boxes and its purposeful movement and its ordinary business, and she let it. Choi Byung-sik resigned his position and left the estate in the 3rd week. He left a written apology, formal, correctly formatted, addressed to Jinwoo, that Taesung placed on the study desk. Jinwoo read it once and put it in a drawer and did not think about it further. There was a version of the story where Choi was a villain, and a version where he was a man who had made a series of reasonable-seeming decisions in service of the wrong person and ended up somewhere he hadn't fully intended, and the truth was probably a compound of both, that Jinwoo did not have the energy or the interest to adjudicate. He let him go and filled the operations manager position with a woman named Jung Hae-rin, who had been managing logistics at the Incheon facility for 4 years, and who, when Taesung called her, took 12 hours to think about it before she said yes, which was exactly the right amount of time for exactly the right reasons. Mrs. O was appointed head of household staff, with a formal contract and a salary adjustment that made her cry briefly and professionally in Taesung's presence, which Taesung handled by pretending he hadn't noticed and offering her tea, which was, Naomi said when she heard about it, probably the most Taesung thing he could have done. The foundation opened its first clinic in the converted East Wing in late November. It was not a ceremony. Naomi had specifically not wanted a ceremony. No ribbon, no speeches, no gathered dignitaries. She wanted it to open the way things should open when they're real, because the work was ready, the staff were ready, and the first patient needed to come in. So it opened on a Tuesday morning in November when a woman from a neighborhood 40 minutes away came in because she couldn't afford the follow-up appointment her hospital had scheduled, and a foundation staff member met her at the door and brought her inside, and the clinic did what it was there to do. Jinwoo heard about this from Naomi that evening when she came upstairs to their room and took off her shoes and sat on the edge of the bed and told him about the woman, her name, the specific thing she'd needed, the look on her face when she realized she wasn't being turned away. He listened. Then he said, "How was the rest of it?" She considered. "The supply tracking system has 3 problems that need to be fixed before we can scale. The second examination room doesn't have adequate ventilation, and I need to get someone in to look at the ductwork. And the coordinator I brought in from the Nairobi network is extraordinary, and I need to make sure we don't lose her to the Singapore office, which has been making noises." Those all sound fixable. They are. She lay back on the bed, looked at the ceiling. It was a good day. He lay down beside her. They were quiet for a while in the way they were quiet when they were both tired and both satisfied, and the room didn't need anything from them. The estate was settling into its evening sounds, the kitchen wrapping up, the security rotation change happening at the east gate somewhere below the sound of the Foundation's new server system doing whatever server systems did in their off hours. "Seo Yan called me today," Naomi said. He turned his head to look at her. She was still looking at the ceiling. "What did she say?" She asked if she could come see the clinic. A pause. She said she wanted to understand what it actually was. She said, not to make it a moment, just to understand it. He said nothing. "I told her yes," Naomi said. He looked at her profile. The familiar line of it. The small scar below her left ear from a road accident in South Sudan before he'd known her. The way she breathed when she was tired but not troubled. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "No." She turned her head to look at him. "But she's your sister," and she asked instead of assumed. "That's something." She held his gaze. "It's a small something. I'm not making it bigger than it is, but it's something." He looked at her. He thought about the night she stood in a ballroom and began to remove her wedding ring. He thought about her at the kitchen table at 5:45 in the morning, pulling foundation documents in her day-old clothes with her hair pulled back, moving fast and certain in the direction of something she had decided to move toward. He thought about her looking at his mother in the sitting room and saying, "I'd rather it be real when it comes, or not come at all." "I need to tell you something," he said. She waited. "I should have told you sooner. He stopped, found the right words rather than the first ones. "I kept showing you rather than telling you because telling felt like something I could do wrong and showing felt safer." "Showing what?" she said. "That I know what you are." He looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at her. "Not what you do, not what you've built, what you actually are." He paused. "You're the most honest person I have ever been in a room with, and that's not a small thing to say in the context of what my life looks like." She looked at him. "You stayed," he said. "For 3 months in a house that treated you like that, you stayed because you had decided not to be a distraction to me. And when I walked in, you were already—" He stopped. "You had already decided to leave rather than let me walk into something smaller than what I'd left." Her eyes were doing the thing they did when something landed past the composure. "You came back early," she said. "I came back because I missed you." He said it the way he said most important things, plainly, without architecture. The negotiations were done. I could have stayed another week debriefing. I came back because I wanted to be in the same room as you. She was quiet for a moment. You should have told me that when you walked in, she said. Before all of it. I know. I would have. She stopped. It would have been a different night. It would have been a different night, he agreed. I'll do better. She looked at him for a long time. Then she put her hand on the side of his face, the way she did sometimes when words had done what they could, and what was left was just the fact of being in the room with each other, real and imperfect, and still there. Okay, she said. Outside, November had brought a different quality of dark. Deeper than October, more committed, the kind of dark that stayed. The estate was quiet in the way it had not been quiet in a long time. Not the silence of tension or held breath, or someone waiting for the next move. Just the silence of a house doing what houses were supposed to do at the end of a long day, with people in it who had earned the quiet. Jinwoo turned off the lamp. In Busan, Madame Kang sat at a window in a house that faced the sea, with a cup of tea cooling on the table beside her, and she looked at the dark water for a long time. She thought about a girl she had been 50 years ago, before the marriage, before the empire, before the long and calculated life of a woman who had learned to survive by turning everything into leverage. She thought about that girl with the specific, irretrievable clarity that comes only after you have stopped fighting something large enough to have required most of your life to fight. She did not know yet what came next. She was 61 years old, and for the first time in 4 decades, she did not have a plan for the next 5 years. And sitting with that was a thing she had not done since before she knew what sitting with something meant. She picked up the cooling tea. She drank it. Outside, the sea made its sound. The same sound it made whether anyone was listening or not, patient and entirely indifferent to what had happened in the last 3 weeks or the last 30 years, moving in its own direction for its own reasons, at its own particular pace. She sat with it for a while. And in the east wing of the Kang estate, on a shelf beside the foundation's new server system, a small framed photograph that Naomi had placed there that morning, not of the family, not of the estate, but of a clinic in South Sudan, bleached pale by the sun, full of people who had needed somewhere to go and found it, sat in the dark and waited for morning.